defining a default exception strategy. Recall that there is an exception strategy that is set by default, kind of implicitly. And this is going to allow us to log the exception and isn't something that we can necessarily go into and configure. But what we can do is we can set our own exception strategy as the new default. So we can replace it. We can do this by creating our global configuration element. And then in that global configuration element, this is like an app level config, we can specify what the default error handling for the entire app should be rather than the default. And that's what we'll do now. So in order to keep error handling consistent, at least for the time being, we're going to create a global configuration element in our global XML file. We'll specify that the default exception strategy should be our choice exception handler. We'll remove the existing exception handling strategies, and we'll use a default exception handling strategy. Let's get started. Let's see if we can set this default exception strategy. We'll go to Global, and from the Global tab, let's go to Global Elements, and let's create a new global element. In creating the new global element, we'll open up the Global Configurations and choose Configuration. Now this is going to allow us to set settings that will be respected by our entire application. The default exception strategy, if we drop it down, we can see all the global exception strategies we have defined to use as the default. Let's choose this as our default exception strategy. We'll then hit OK and save the XML file. The next thing we want to do is go back to our implementation and remove existing references to exception strategies. For now, we should just have one in the getFlights flow, so we can select that reference exception strategy and delete it. Once you've got that reference deleted out of implementation, we'll save the application, and let's go back in and send some requests through. We'll go back to Postman. We'll start with flights and call for foo. All right, so we still are able to call our exception handler now that it's the default, even though it's not being referenced, it says foo. Now, if we do something like United this time, or Delta rather, and hit send, great. Now we can see even a direct call is able to use that exception handler because it's defined globally and set as the default. So when it doesn't find an exception strategy in a specific flow, it falls back to that choice exception strategy and then logs this information inside of here. All right,